Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Victoria and it's so nice to meet you. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before. I'm getting over a cold. I'm so sorry. My chest is not feeling that great when I breathe, so bear with me. I read a mixture of good books and not so great books, so I think there's mainly good books, so I hope you'll enjoy my reviews. Murder at Gull's Nest. This was an interesting story, and I had recently only heard about this, and then when I saw it at the bookstore, I grabbed it. It was half off, and I was like, okay. This is about a woman named Nora. She was a nun, and she left her, I guess her convent, but she worked as a nurse while being a nun. She goes to this place called Gull's Nest. She lives in England, and while she is at Gull's Nest, there are a bunch of people there. So she rents a room, and everyone else rents a room as well. There are lots of characters in this, and I struggle with lots of characters, but I feel like they were introduced kind of slowly because she gets to know each one at different parts throughout the story. So I love that. But the real reason why she's at Gull's Nest is because she had this friend that she had been a part of being in the convent for a while, and she got to know her, became good friends with her, and she was writing her letters all the time. But then the letters stopped, and that was not like her friend. And her name is Frida. Frida stopped writing, and it's just out of character. So she goes to investigate, but she doesn't say that she knows Frida to anyone there. She just kind of asks questions. Who was in my room before me? That kind of thing. And she's very inquisitive. Maybe she's 50. I think they might have said she was in her older 40s. So she goes to the police station to say that her friend is missing. And she gets very involved with this investigator because she finds out that someone that was staying there had been murdered. It was one of the people that was a tenant there. Is the killer also involved with the disappearance of her friend? So she tries to tell the investigator that, and he's like, oh, let me do my job. But at the same time, he's kind of giving up and he doesn't really investigate properly. So she thinks she could do a better job. But they form like this interesting relationship where at first they're like butting heads, but then over time they get to know each other a bit better and they work well together. So it's just cool how you could see that coming about. I really like the sense of humor in this and the solving of a mystery over time. I think it was a good intro because you could tell that now there's going to be a whole series. I mean, it says on here, Nora Breen investigates. And so you figure this is book one that just recently came out, and now there hopefully will be more. And I really enjoyed that setup. In case you're wondering about the content in this, there are some swear words. There's talk of people having affairs. There is talk of a playboy. He's actually one of the characters. There is talk about rape. The word is never used, and in fact, they don't describe anything, but there is simply something mentioned where you know what happened. So just for a trigger warning. There's a lot of smoking in this. There's also some drinking. And of course, there's murder, and there are a little bit of descriptions of what a body might look like when it's found, as well as how the person was murdered. One thing that was kind of weird is I had to kind of guess which time period this book is set in because they don't mention a date at all. I figured that it had to be the 50s or the 60s. The only place where it gives me a hint is it says on the insert 1954, unless like I missed it in the first chapter. I will say the first chapter, I was a little confused at first and I didn't get into it in the first chapter, but that second chapter, it was so good and that carried me through. And if I only based this off of the first chapter, I probably would have given up, but I was like, let's keep going. And then that hooked me. It was really well done. For the autumn reading bingo, this could have fit for an orange cover, but you also see that there's this teacup. In this book, they drink tea like crazy. They also drink a lot of coffee, and then there is talk of cocoa. So we have all the warm beverages in this, and I'm a cocoa drinker myself. So the fact that it was mentioned, yes, let's do it. So that is where I am putting this. One of the ones that I did not enjoy is The Woman in the Library. I gave this 2 stars on my Goodreads. It starts out where we're learning about this one character who's Australian. She's living in America. And while she's in this library, she's kind of looking around. She's understanding who's there. She's going to be writing a story and she's kind of getting ideas and research done. She notices these people, and while she's paying attention to them, she hears this woman screaming. She's kind of looking around and she's like, did you guys hear that? And then they're like trying to listen, and then they're talking to each other. And somehow from that, they form this like incredible bond, these 4 people. But then that chapter, it goes into this person is emailing this other person. And it turns out that the person writing this story about this person screaming in the library is having a correspondence with a fan that is reading, I guess, like kind of like an arc. I don't know what it's called when you read a book like chapter by chapter as it's being written, and this person is kind of giving their insights on what they feel about the story thus far. So it gives the author a little bit of an idea if it needs changes or not. We only get the perspective of this Leo is his name that keeps writing to the author, but we never hear from the author, which is interesting. We only hear from her story. I think what was good was it kind of related some of the emails. She was like responding in a way, not always the way the person wanted when she was writing each chapter. And this is supposed to be set around the time of COVID. So the author is actually living in Australia herself, and she kind of can't go anywhere. So she's just writing. So my problem with this book, I couldn't really relate, or I didn't feel any bonds to any of the people in this story. And that's bothersome for me. I want to be able to have something that I can gravitate towards. Even the story and how it's written, I couldn't really enjoy, and I tried to. And I'd been so looking forward to this that I even suggested this to a book club that I'm a part of, and it was almost voted on. But in a way, I'm kind of glad it wasn't, because I would have been like, yeah, I didn't really care for it. The ending didn't make sense. I was like, what? Because it seemed like it had a conclusion, but then all of a sudden something else happens and you're like, this doesn't make sense. So that was a little weird, and I didn't understand it so much. There is some content in this book, so I didn't know what the content was when I started reading this. While there's not graphic sexual scenes, there is the start. I would say it goes to second base at one point, and that was going way too far for me. The reason why I like clean stories so much is I feel like it's pornography. I don't really want to get that into my head. I'm a married woman, and I want to keep those intimacies between me and my husband, and like I enjoy being with him. So the fact that I'm like reading someone else, even if it's like not real, I just can't. I just don't like that, and I don't think it's something as a Christian that I should indulge in. There is talk about a child being sexually abused at one point, like a teen person, but not in detail again. There are some stereotypes of race. Oh, you should maybe write someone that has a hoodie and then we'll know that they're black or something like that. And I really enjoyed actually the response to that, what she did with it. That was actually pretty clever. But why? But at the same time, why is that mentioned? But I think it helps you understand this one character a little bit. There is talk about murder. So again, I thought this story, it had potential in a way. Here was my biggest fault with this book. When you meet someone or three people in a library, and yes, you have this connection because of someone being murdered or someone else reacting to finding a murder, and they're not sure which it is, or if it's just someone that's drawing attention to themselves. But when you witness something like that, yes, you might connect to someone, but would you all of you like be clustered as like best friends suddenly? I don't believe that. I feel like at the ages that they are, they've already established their friends in life, that like, yes, you can make some new friends, but you wouldn't be like all of you having to constantly be around each other. That was just odd to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Murder and Postscript. This was very well done. I liked this a lot. This is about a woman named Amelia. She writes a column, like an advice column. It's set in 1860 in London. She is a widow, and she's young. And she doesn't really need to write this column, but she enjoys doing it. One of her late husband's friends comes to visit her. She lives with her late husband's aunt as well as his niece. And she's raising his niece as if she is her own daughter. And she's only 10 at this point. Her husband's been dead for 3 years. She has been wearing her mourning clothes still. And she receives a visit from one of her late husband's friends who said that they had been close at one point, and she was like, oh, I don't remember hearing about you. She also feels like they didn't really get to know a lot about each other's background because they were only married for 2 months. He had an illness, and so she's been a widow way longer than she was married. But she definitely loved her husband, and she adores being a mother. So while she has all this stuff happening at once with this visitor, she also gets a letter within that same day from someone that's having a cry for help. They're saying in this letter, help me, I am being followed. I think I might die or be murdered or something like that. So this person wants to meet her, and usually she's like, oh, I'm not going to reveal who I am. I'm not going to meet up with anyone. But she feels so compelled to meet with this person. And when she meets with this person, I can't say what happens. But anyway, she starts investigating things. And then the guy that is the friend of her husband tries to help her out. And I really think this was a very well done book, because most of this book is actually you learning about the characters, not so much the investigation, but the investigation happens too. But I think the timing was done very well. It didn't drag, and I was so interested in what was going to happen next. But there are different things that happen, and she is trying to solve this situation and find out what is happening with this person that was being followed. And she just keeps finding new things. So yeah, she was a very clever person. Like, it's nice to have someone that's very into her intelligence, and you could tell that she enjoys her life. And every chapter starts with one of her letters from her column. It's just funny because like there's wit in every single one. She has high morals. So like many times she's like, I don't think you should do this. Dear Lady Agony, do you believe it's better to be polite or honest? I cannot seem to do both, no matter how hard I try. Devotedly, Two-Faced Trouble. Dear Two-Faced Trouble, honest? The answer is just as simple and just that hard. Yours in secret, Lady Agony. I love that. It's very fun. On my autumn reading bingo, there is something that says fire or rain, and I was really worried that I would read a book that didn't have either of those. Like, I almost put this as atmospheric, but it has a whole rainy scene where it's raining and pouring and there's a storm, and she is doing some investigating at someone's estate, and she has to stay overnight there. They just talk a lot about the rain in that chapter, and then the next morning they set off and they're riding in like the mud and the puddles from leftover of the rain. And so I thought that was really cool because that fit what I needed for this bingo. Wormwood Abbey. I had been wanting to read this since last year. This is a whole series. I will get to it eventually. But this was really cute. It's a Christian fantasy book. It's about a young woman named Edith. When she was young, her mother died, and she has now been living with her father and her stepmother and also her brother. Her father is a pastor. They live in England. She finds out that her uncle and her cousin died. So her whole family decides to go visit her cousins to give them comfort and to deal with their estate, which is called Wormwood Abbey. Now, on the side, Edith likes to write books, and her books sell really well. Once she gets to meet her cousins, she had never met them before, she decides who maybe she should befriend. They seem to not be warm towards her. She doesn't really understand why, so she wants to be friends with them and get along with them. And she also feels very sad for the loss of their father and brother. That would be really difficult. She wants to find out how they died, and she doesn't want to pry because, you know, she wants to also comfort them. Her oldest cousin is often around this man who is a Drake who lives next door, and she feels like her cousin is in love with him and maybe at the same time wants to set her up with him, and she doesn't understand why, and she's keeping her distance. But while she's there, she discovers something. She finds this creature, and she thinks maybe it's some sort of salamander, and her brother is really fascinated with all creatures. That's totally up his alley. But what she finds out is that there's a lot more than meets the eye. There's some suspicious activity, and she wants to learn a little bit about the mysteries that she sees. For the autumn reading bingo, I want to be able to place this on the bingo card for atmospheric. There is a lot of atmosphere in this book. This dark cave that she's in at one point, and she can barely see anything around it, and she hears things, she feels things. When she's walking through the abbey, she also feels like something. This could have been slightly creepy, but not creepy, but it's definitely got that atmosphere where you're feeling a lot of that autumny vibe in this book, and just the surroundings around you. It's just, the descriptions are really well done. And so I felt like I was there, and I just wanted to explore as well. Not so much the cave. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is a story that we've all probably grown up knowing a little bit about, but to actually read it is a different experience. It was amazing. Even though this is short, it's very action-packed. You could read this in a day. The way that Robert Louis Stevenson had written this is just, wow. I loved his style. What's interesting about this, I always thought that there would be like the perspective of Jekyll and Hyde, but instead it's the perspective of this lawyer, and his last name is Utterson. Now, he was an old friend of Dr. Jekyll, and he is selected to be a lawyer, and he is told to put Mr. Hyde in the will of Dr. Jekyll. The problem Utterson has has with this is that he has heard some horrific tales about this Mr. Hyde. And he is like, why would you want him to be on your will? So he wants to talk first to Mr. Hyde or Dr. Jekyll, but he sees that Mr. Hyde goes into the building where Dr. Jekyll lives. And so he starts talking to him a little bit. He also is trying to see what he's like. And then he wants to get in touch every time with Dr. Jekyll, but he's never around when he tries to see him. And there are just all these crimes that he keeps hearing about. And what you find is shocking and horrifying. I think if this were longer, this would totally be a 5-star read for me. It was so close to that. On my autumn reading bingo card, short story or book under 200 pages. Now, there are different copies of this book. Some are 100 pages. They're all under 200 pages. Some are only like 60 pages. There are collections with the story. So I sought out specifically, I wanted to find just the short story. And that was actually not easy to do because everything puts other stories in with it. But yes, if you just read this alone, it's like 80 pages to 100 pages. So I'm glad I filled that. Just with this review, I've filled 4 out of the 9 slots for my bingo already. Speaker for the Dead. Now I finished my Sci-fi September read. That's what this was. And my husband picked it out for me because he is a sci-fi obsessed man. Like most of the books he reads are sci-fi. And I don't really go into that genre too often, usually. Now, I read Ender's Game, which is the first book from this series. This is the second book of the series, but it's so different. Yes, it ties in the two, but it's also very different of a story than the first book. And I liked that. It wasn't something that you would think would be. Like the setting is so different. The idea behind it is so different. And so I was like, this is brilliant. And I was a little worried because I didn't think I was going to enjoy it. I did like Ender's Game, but I was like, I don't know. There's a lot of talk about science-y things in this, and science usually goes over my head like here and there. So for Speaker of the Dead, the main character, he goes by Ender, which is a nickname that his sister had given him, but his real name is Andrew Wiggin, so he uses both of those names throughout this book. In the first book, he was a child and he grows over time in that book. And there was a war that took place and he became a sort of war hero, but for him, he wasn't a hero, he was a destructor. So that is the tiniest way to sum up the first book. I have not read that book in years and years. In the second book, which I think there are 6 books in this series, originally there were 4. Much later, he wrote 2 more. But for this one, he starts out where he lives in a planet that is pretty much like a Nordic area. They talk a lot about Calvinists. With every planet, there's like some sort of religious following. Ender, he's hanging out with his sister who has done all this traveling with him. She's married, very pregnant. He gets a call, and this call is for him to be a speaker for the dead. As a speaker, he is someone that has to investigate and learn all about a dead person, and then he tells their story in full, all the bad things and all the good things. He tells their story to either family members or friends or a whole bunch of people. In this book, first he hears about a murder that happens on another planet, and it's something that set the course for a whole lot of different planets. They all hear about this. It's a major thing. There's a scientist called a xenologer that was on this planet, and he was the one that was murdered. And he had a young apprentice who was chosen by him, and she is the one that makes the call. So we learn a little bit about this man at the start of the book, and then it kind of goes into Ender's perspective. But this young girl, we learn her story of how she becomes chosen, and the guy that she works for also has a son that works for him. He decides he is going to travel 22 light years away to help this person that has called him to be a speaker for that murdered man. That person has to wait 22 years for him to arrive. So 22 years goes by and he lands in there, and we learn that there's a lot more stuff that has happened and that he got called even 2 more times by the young girl that we had last heard about. Now she had children that wanted a speaker for other people that had died. And so he also has this like earpiece that he listens in. Now this was written, I think, in the 80s. I think it says 86. Oh, it's his first edition was 1986. It is so interesting because he even like mentions the net. It seems like if you read this now, it's like technology is very similar to what it is now. So it's like kind of genius in a way. But anyway, he has this thing in his ear and it's like a jewel gem thing. And he hears this computer person that's always like talking to him. And her name is Jane. And so she kind of floats throughout the system of the internet. So fascinating. And she's quite a fun character. But anyway, this is the first time he's days away from his sister ever, other than when he was a young boy in training for war type of games. That's hard on him, especially now that she's going to be 22 years older than him. So anyway, while he's on this planet, they all speak Portuguese. Now, it's the country of Portugal in our time used to be called Lusitania. And so this is called Lusitania, but it's not Portugal. They make it more like Brazil, which also speaks Portuguese. So when he goes there, there are these creatures, these aliens that are known as piggies. And they're not actually pigs. They're these alien creatures that have snouts. So that's why they're called piggies. They don't call themselves that. That's what everyone else calls them. These xenologers are researching them. They've been trying to learn about the way they live their lives, trying to research and figure out why they do the things that they do. So Ender, what I love about Ender, this is why this is so good now. Ender, not only does he want to speak for the dead and try to understand these dead people, he wants to understand the people, but also with these aliens, he wants to learn about them. So it's very interesting because he is like so much a pacifist because of what he went through in the first book. And in this book, he is so understanding of everyone and he tries to learn their stories and see the importance of it. And I love his character. It's just amazing. This was almost a 5-star read for me. I gave it 4.5 stars. This is just so good. I'm impressed because I don't tend to like science fiction books that much. This really got me. And there was a whole scene towards the end that was just wow. On Lusitania, most of them are all Catholics, but it's like slightly different from how the Catholics in our planet, but there are some scriptures quoted in it because that's what their belief is. So if you just don't like religion, there is talk about people that are not religious. There was what I remember, there was one bad word, the longer B word was mentioned. There's talk about affairs, there's talk about murder, and it's a little gory. They're gruesome, but I think the way they talked about it and handled it was very unique. There is a mention where Ender, his clothes are all wet and he takes off his clothes and he then puts on warm clothes, but there's nothing sexual at all. They seem to not bat an eye over this. Oh, there is domestic abuse in this. So good. Last but not least is the worst book that I have read this season. One of the worst books I've read all year, and that is Mountain Laurel. Mountain Laurel, I will not be reading more of this series. There are 2 other books in it. It was awful. This is a Christian book. This is very hard for me to review this without giving spoilers. It is way too long, almost 500 pages long, and it should have been like 100 pages less. It is very drawn out. Now, the things that are mentioned in this, there is a pretty good storyline, honestly. This is set in the early 1800s. I think it was North Carolina it was set in. This is before emancipation. Now, most Christian books are pretty clean. I find this to not be as clean as it should have been. I was surprised, honestly. The main character, he's very lustful, named Ian. He grew up in Boston. He went to Canada for a while, so he has been raised in like a free environment, but he has family that lives in North Carolina, so he goes down there to help his uncle. And his uncle is a farmer. He has a bit of an estate. He has his land. And while he's there, he sees the slaves that are there. And one woman, he thinks it's his cousin. He's starting to talk to her, thinking, oh, you're my cousin, to find out instead that this is a black slave that is passing white. He is checking her out, and the way, like, they explain how he checks her out. And then he also checks out his cousin by marriage. His uncle had been married and his wife died. And then he remarried a woman that I think was a widow, and she had 2 children of her own. Anyway, he's like checking out the cousin and he's explaining his thoughts, and it's just like, man, this guy just wants to check everyone else out. But then one of his cousins tries to, it just doesn't seem like it would be proper for the time. I don't really know if many women would be as forthright as she is. She tries to get with him and it's just like, what? So that was a little weird. So I'm telling you some content now. I'll tell you more later. Anyway, Ian, he is supposed to find a wife because he is going to get this estate eventually, and he needs to have a family so that he can leave it to someone. That's pretty much what he is set out to do, to be helpful. His uncle wants him to marry one of the cousins, but he is so drawn to this slave girl, and it is very typical white man, in a way grooming her into thinking he's so into her. He's obsessed with her. Makes it seem like it's love. And there is this whole thing. He comes from a Scottish background, and he said his parents, they married by this Scottish way of where you're not actually married. It's like a year thing, but it's how it was in Scotland. Maybe it was accepted there, but it's not in America. And he tries to convince this girl to kind of do this with him, so that way he could sleep with her. But he doesn't actually want to just sleep with her, but he starts to get intimate with her, and then he kind of just says like, are you sure, do you want to? And she's like, yeah. And he makes her believe that, like, she keeps calling herself his wife, really thinks that he is now married to her. It drove me nuts because the whole idea of the story is where you're supposed to really like this couple and really like this idea of him marrying this woman that he will not actually be able to marry by law anyway. Just don't read this book is what I'm saying. I'm trying not to give things away, so I'll just keep it like that. But there's a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of drama in this, but there's also a lot of mistreatment of slaves in this. And I feel like it wasn't pieced well. There is a lot of talk about forgiveness, and there is some talk about the gospel. The slave girl, she has faith. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. The way it ended was awful. There's just a lot of stuff that if you were to live in that time period, it wouldn't have worked. It didn't make sense. I need to let you know, I have read lots of actual slave accounts from that time, as well as a lot of histories about the slavery of that time. And the way this book, it just seems, even though there's like a Quaker who's an abolitionist in this too, it just seems like you're trying to make this romance story that is gonna not work out. Painful story with lots of drama, and it's not nice. Just don't. Well, this was so long. I'm so sorry of how long this was getting, but you guys are amazing if you stuck around to hear all this. I hope that you are reading a lot of books. I have like a stack of like books that are library books. I read a lot of books on my Nook too. Sometimes when you see the picture on the side, it's a Nook book. Bought a couple books because my library didn't have them. I can't wait. I've already gotten through, I think, 11 books total out of the 42. I think that's awesome. I'm doing great. All right, guys, well, have a wonderful day, and bye.